All right, here we go. We're heading towards the Lokie. We're gonna climb aboard and take a ride.
Take a trip on. That was apologies for that.
Perfect timing.
Just the
each car has its own. You got King Cole, Higher Up, Mountain View, and Loyal Express, and then the caboose is the Ashlander. So we're taking the caboose.
I was gonna say, are you get
I'm gonna get it right. Actually, I'm going right here. Well, maybe not. Looks like somebody might already be there.
how many are you allowed to fit in here?
I don't know, but there's 2 benches, so. Oh, here we go. Let's sit here.
Clear up there?
And we're rolling. Backwards.
All right, backwards.
I'm sitting the wrong way. Well, I guess I can sit up there. Would it be alright if I sit down?
Yeah, it's fine.
I didn't know if somebody was sitting here because I saw that bag.
Yeah, that's my bag of stuff that I hope we don't need. Benadryl, bee stick spray.
Yeah, this time of year, probably not.
No, believe it or not, we didn't run this last week because of bees. We had a ground test. Fine. We decided to run yesterday because it was cool.
Yeah.
First one out, we had a tourist. But fortunately, one of the young line guys comes along. He walked the tracks and didn't see where they were going at.
Alright, so if you've seen my 425 video, that's the difference between a mine steam whistle and a regular locomotive steam whistle.
Folks, I'd like to welcome you to Ashland. Ashland's a town down below us. Typical coal region community. It was founded as a borough back in 1857. When they incorporated the borough, they chose the name Ashland to honor Senator Henry Clay from Kentucky. Might strike you as a little bit odd why it's a small town in Pennsylvania honoring a southerner like that. But if you look back at the history of our country in the 1850s, as the Senator Clay had passed a lot of tariffs that were very protective of the American coal industry. His efforts in the Senate really helped this area to grow, and you'll find a lot of references to Clay throughout the coal region. Like I said, Ashland is a typical coal region community, Back when there was a great demand for anthracite coal, our town had a population of over 7,000 people. But as the demand for anthracite declined, so did the population of Ashland. Right now we have a little over 2,800 living in town. Now if you look directly behind me across Ashland to that mountain you see in the distance, just over the next ridge, about 2 miles north of us, lying in the next valley, is the town of Centralia. Centralia is famous for having a mine fire burning beneath it for 58 years now. Years ago we used to talk about that mine fire when we stopped here, but that area has gotten so overgrown it's really hard to reference anything in Centralia. It makes it kind of difficult for us to get across to you what's going on over there. I will tell you that the mine fire started in an abandoned open stripping pit at the southern end of Centralia. Out at the end of our line we have a similar stripping pit. I'll tell you about the importance of that pit to our operation here, as well as how the Centralia mine fire started and still impacts the area today. We have other points of interest for you out there as well, and we're going to get everyone off the cars out at the end. All right, John.
Did you get all that? Okay, so that's a nice little bonus there. I didn't expect the actual tour and stops with information. I just thought it was a ride, so that's definitely an awesome bonus there.
Full cars went out on this level, the empty back on that level down there.
Gotcha. So is there any rail remaining down there? Or was it full car?
A lot of it's This is the original rail bed. North, a lot of it.
Told that's been closed now for at least 10 to 12 years. I've seen those walk
Right this way, folks.
Oh, wow.
Guys, you come down this way, you'll be able to hear me a lot better.
Huh?
Every crowd has a wise guy.
Yeah, that's me.
I can give you a bonus story on that later, maybe.
Okay. I like bonus stories.
One we don't normally give. Depends on how much time we have. All right, folks, point some things out for you here at the end of the line. Looking over the railing and structure right here below us, that's a replica of an old bootleg coal mine. Bootlegs came into being in 1929 when the country was hit with the Great Depression. time there were no government programs like unemployment or welfare to assist them. In order to survive, the men would come up on a mountain and start an operation like the one we have here. What we have on display is a 3-man bootleg. 1 man will be lowered in that bucket down beneath the ground to mine the coal, and 2 men would wait on top. When the miner in the hole had the bucket full, he'd signal the men on top, they get on the windlass, crank the bucket to the surface, dump the coal out and send the empty bucket back down for the miner in the hole to refill. While the miner in the hole was refilling the bucket, the men on top would crack the coal and bag it. At the end of their workday, they'd take it downtown hoping to sell it for $2 or $3 a ton. What they couldn't sell, they used for heating and cooking in their own homes. They called it bootlegging because what the men were doing in the mountains of the county was illegal. They're actually stealing the coal that belonged to the coal companies that owned the land. Naturally, the coal companies were upset about that. So the coal companies would send the coal and iron police, their own police force, out to scour the mountains of the county looking for these operations. When the coal and iron cops found a bootleg mine, they get the miner up out of the ground, they throw dynamite down to blast the hole shut, and the men were then taken downtown where they went before the JP, and they were fined for stealing the coal. Because it was the Depression, the guys never had money to pay their fines, so they were then taken to our county jail in Pottsville. There are so many of these operations going on at that time in our history that our jail got really overcrowded, and the warden would have no choice but to release the miners the next morning after they had served just one night in jail. The guys would come home, reload their supplies, get back up on the mountain, and start all over again. Well, then it got pretty nasty in the area between the miners and the coal and iron cops. There were a lot of acts of violence, there were a lot of acts of vandalism. Some miners even went to the extreme of dynamiting the policemen's cars. The county government became concerned about this, so they hosted a series of meetings to try and resolve this. They decided at these meetings that if the miners would pay a royalty or a small amount of money for every ton of coal they get out of a bootleg to the landowners would be satisfied. That was also a satisfactory arrangement for the miners, and that's how the Independent Miners Association started in Pennsylvania. But even though they legalized bootlegging, it was still very dangerous work, especially for the man working underground. When he was down there working, the only light that he had to work with was a small open flame lamp on his helmet called a carbide lamp. It threw an open flame about 2 or 3 inches in length. Besides the constant fear of cave-ins, the miners had to worry about 2 very deadly gases. The first the miners called black damp, which is heavy air or air without oxygen. If a miner walked into black damp, the lamp on his helmet went out, and that gave him a warning to get out of there and get out of there quickly before he was overcome. The second gas that he had to worry about was methane. If he'd hit a pocket of methane with the open flame lamp on his helmet, it was one big explosion. A lot of men were maimed or lost their lives in operations like that. Bootlegging and what you saw in the Pioneer Tunnel, what's known as deep mining. Behind you, there's an entirely different type of mining operation. That's what's known as open pit or strip mining. Some people also call that surface mining. It's the mammoth vein that was stripped out of that pit, the largest vein of coal in the anthracite fields. To give you an idea how much coal was out there at one time, if you look up to the left just below the tree line, you'll see a wall of rock. That's the bottom rock. From that point, 60 feet to the right, for as far as the eye could see, and all the way down there at one time was all coal. We're standing squarely in the heart of the anthracite region. That pit was started in 1910 and it was dug through 1921. When they started, they went on top of the mountain that used to be there, drilled a series of holes, loaded the holes with dynamite, and blasted all the rock and other material above the coal loose. That's called the overburden. They pushed the overburden off to the side to expose the mammoth, and once the seam was exposed, they pulled coal cars up there, and those cars were loaded by old-time steam shovels that ran on rails in that pit. When those cars were full, they were rolled to the end of our line. At one time, there was another rail line connected to the rail line that's still here today. The second rail line started at the bottom rock, ran down through this area where we're standing, and then it continued on down the mountain behind me. That's what's known as a plain. At the top of the plain, there was a steam-driven engine house, and at the bottom of the plain, way down in the valley in the town of Ashland, was our breaker. The breaker is a plant designed to clean size and prepare the coal. Well, they'd attach several loaded coal cars onto a cable, lower them down the mountain behind me by steam and rail power, dump the coal on the top of the breaker, process it, and then ship it out on the Reading Railroad. The coal from our mine was also prepared downtown. In the mine, the mules would pull the loaded coal cars out. When they had about 15 or 20 cars sitting outside, they'd attach them onto a locomotive and back them out the same way that we rode here today. Switch those cars onto the plane and lower them down so the coal from the mine could be run through the breaker as well. And when I talk about the breaker process, I don't want you thinking that it was something totally automated like most things are today. Back then it was about 10% automation, 90% manual labor. They'd lower the cars down the mountain behind me and dump the coal to the very top of the breaker building. The first thing that would happen is it'd be run through a series of rollers, big steel drums with spikes on them that would crack the coal down to the size they needed for the orders. Once the raw product cleared the rollers, it was funneled into a series of chutes that ran down through the length of the breaker building. Perched along those chutes at various intervals were 10 to 12-year-old boys called breaker boys. It was their job to separate the rock, the dirt, and the coal. What the boys would do, they'd block the flow of coal in the chute with their feet, reach in there, pick out the rock and other debris, throw it off to the side into the waste box. Once they thought they had it clean enough, they'd lift their feet, let the coal slide down to the next boy in line. He'd do the same thing. Theory being, by the time it got to the very bottom of the breaker, there'd be nothing but raw coal coming out of the chutes and into the coal cars. Like I said, back then that was a job for a 10 to 12-year-old boy locally. Then they worked a 10-hour workday 6 days a week, and for that the boys were paid 90 cents a day. All right, back to our mine's history. The Pioneer closed in 1931 at the height of the Depression. The company ran out of money and they left all their equipment inside the mine and blasted the entrance to the mine shut. They intended to reopen, but they never did. When they decided to open this for tours in the 60s, guys went in the mine, they found equipment in there, so they brought it out and rebuilt it. And those cars that you rode out in today were actual coal cars that worked this mine through 1931. Now the engine that pushed us here, it's 93 years old this year, the Henry Clay. She was built back in 1927 by the Vulcan Iron Works up in Wilkes-Barre. Went to work on a job similar to this in the Delano and Hazleton areas for 28 years. When that job was completed, the engine was abandoned. We've been running it for 58 years now. It's fueled by anthracite, the hard coal. Fully loaded with coal and water, that engine weighs 30 tons. It was actually working a coal operation to pull its own weight of 30 tons plus 80 tons of coal. And it's the only Vulcan narrow gauge still operating in the world under anthracite steam today. Now, a little backstory on the Pioneer, how we went from being a working mine to a touring mine. Back in the 1950s, when the big mine shut down around here, the local economy was in a really bad slump. We had a very high rate of unemployment. A lot of people were leaving Ashland trying to find jobs elsewhere. Common thinking in town at that time was that they needed to attract manufacturing jobs to replace the lost mining jobs. Excuse me. But we had some people in town thought tourism would help the economy as well. One of our local attorneys was on vacation in New York with his family. While they were up there, they toured a salt mine. On the way home, Mrs. Strauss told Harry she thought that it was a good tour, and that it would be great if there's a coal mine that people could tour in Ashland like they toured the salt mine in New York. Well, Attorney Strauss was intrigued with that idea. He decided to pitch it around town. Lots of people thought he was pretty crazy, but some people thought it was a good idea. Definitely something worth looking into, so they formed a board to do that. Paul Reidler was picked as their first board treasurer. The more they talked about it, the more they thought this could be something good for our town. So after much planning and discussion, it was decided it was something they wanted to go forward with. At one of the last planning sessions, though, one of the directors said, you know, it's all good in theory. We have no money. How do you think we can do this? At that point, Mr. Reidler went around the table and assessed the board members anywhere between $100 and $500, whatever he felt the men could afford. That's where they got the money to reopen the Pioneer. With the money that the board put up, they leased the mine, started retimbering it. They were building buildings out there. Everything was progressing nicely, except all along one of the directors was insisting that we needed steam engines here as well as reopening the mine. Well, they looked around the area and they found 2 Vulcans in a junkyard in Hazleton, sent up to see if they were available. The junk dealer told the board he thought the engines were useless. He was actually planning on cutting them up with a torch for their scrap metal value, but he told the guys if they're really interested, he'd wait to see if they could come up with the money. He wanted $1,200 a piece for them. At that point, the board was out of money. The men refused to put any more of their own up, so they made an appeal to the community. The Kiwanis Club and the Rotary Club in Ashland each agreed to buy an engine for us. The 27 that we're running today and the 26 that we have in reserve. That's why we have the Kiwanis and Rotary emblems on the cab. Back then they paid scrap value of $1,200. Today each engine's valued at $250,000. Excellent return on the investment.
Definitely.
Nah, truly they're priceless. All right, folks, I said we'd talk about Centralia. As I mentioned before, I said it started in a similar stripping pit to what we have here. And similar is an important word because there's a couple things out there that don't accurately represent what a stripping pit was like back when that fire started. One of those things is all that vegetation that you see on the left side of the mountain. That's fairly new growth out there. As the top of the mountain's been eroding with rains and the snow that's bringing topsoil down, allowing for those trees and bushes to grow out there. Up until about 10 years ago, that was just a rock wall leading into the pit. The other thing deceiving about our pit is the depth. This is a rare one in that it was actually reclaimed back in the 20s and 30s. When they sent the mine cars down the mountain behind me, rather than bring them back empty, they loaded them with the junk from the breaker and started filling the pit in. One time that pit was about 400 feet deeper than what you're seeing today. So to understand what a stripping pit was like and what happened in Centralia, picture about an 800 to 1,000 foot deep hole in the ground with sheer rock walls leading right down to the bottom. Certainly that's something very dangerous to be around. We're in the coal region. Naturally, all the towns around here were surrounded by pits like that. You go back into the 40s and 50s, another problem we had in the Commonwealth was a garbage problem. Well, somebody came up with the bright idea Let's fill in all these stripping pits with garbage and kill two birds with one stone. It's kind of hard to believe, but that was considered such a good idea back then. It was sanctioned by the Commonwealth, and that's how a lot of towns had their dumps locally. The only problem with that plan was that the stripping pits were filling quickly because there's no way to compact the garbage they're putting into the ground. In order to get around that problem, once or twice a year they'd set the dumps on fire with the intention of bringing the pile down, allowing for more garbage to go into the ground. That's exactly what Centralia Borough Council did back on Memorial Week of '62. They sent the fire company down to the dump. The firemen threw flares in, caught the garbage on fire. They let it burn for 2 days till it was down to a manageable amount, and then they put the garbage fire out. What nobody realized, though, was the garbage burning at the bottom of the pit touched an open seam of coal and ignited it. It took about 2 years till they noticed any effects from that fire. Then residents in some parts of Centralia complained about unusually high temperatures in their basements and gases coming up from beneath the ground. At that time, the state did some surveys over there. They sunk boreholes 300 feet into the ground, lowered thermometers down those holes, and they found temperatures underground in some parts of Centralia were as high as 1,500 degrees. By then, the mine fire moved directly beneath the town. Now, in 58 years, they made 2 attempts to put the Centralia mine fire out. The first time, they tried flooding it with water, but because of all the old mine workings on the mountain and through the valley, the water rushed by the mine fire and had no effect on it. The second time they tried pumping in fly ash under pressure in order to smother the fire, but that fire is burning so intensely it just jumped that barrier and continues to burn today. There's only one sure way to put a mine fire like that out, and that's to dig down, bring that burning material up, put it off to the side and water it down. Doing that will put the fire out, but doing that means moving the whole town of Centralia. So the federal government allocated $42 million for that project. They assessed each property in Centralia, made each homeowner a more than fair market value offer for their homes, and they also gave the residents relocation fees of $15,000. Over 400 families have accepted the offer and moved out of Centralia, but there's still 6 people living there today. However, as of right now, they have no plans to put the Centralia mine fire out. And out of fairness to the 6 people that remain, they're not the reason they're not putting the fire out. The reason is money. They estimate digging that fire out is going to cost $660 million. They don't have that funding in place, so as long as the government's not doing anything about the fire, they've decided to allow those people to remain in their homes. Now, does anybody have any questions? That's kind of a difficult question to answer. The people that are over there are living under eminent domain, so I guess technically the feds own their homes. Different parts of the town, like I had relatives over there, and when they passed away, the government bought the property, but my uncle had a vacant lot, and my cousins still own that, but they're not allowed to do anything with it. The government bought the 2 sections of the land that my uncle owned that had buildings on it.
So what about the mineral rights that was around?
The borough itself. You're welcome. All right, I promise you I'd give you a bonus on that. Do you remember what it's called?
Bootleg mine.
What kind of mine are we working
Bootlegger. There you go.
Little known Pioneer Tunnel fact: we have a dead bootlegger in our bootleg hole. When they opened here, besides the tourism money and the boost for the local economy, one of the aims of opening here was to get unemployed miners back to work. The original staff, with the exception of the first engineer, they were all certified miners and mine foremen. One of the gentlemen they hired was a guy from town named Eddie Krosnodumsky. Eddie was hired in '62, and his job from '62 to '65, he mined the coal for the train until that became illegal. But he stayed on as a handyman and a conductor. He was an interesting gentleman. He was with us through the '90s. And in our brochures, there's a picture of Eddie sitting down there cracking coal. If you have one over there, sure, you'll see it. But,
I'll definitely have to grab one now.
well, moving forward, Eddie stayed on. Once he retired sometime in the '90s, and he lived right over the hill from us. And he had never married, he didn't have family, so he was here quite often. I guess in around 2005, Eddie passed away, and we all went to his memorial service. He was cremated, and his last wishes were that he wanted his ashes buried half in the bootleg where he mined, his picture was taken, and half in the 7-foot where he mined the coal. So we actually have half of a dead bootlegger in our bootleg mine.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And Eddie was an interesting man. He really was.
And that, I don't know if that's called crab or what that is.
Culm, C-U-L-M.
C-U-L-M.
Yeah, comb.
Can the comb be the
Yes. Yes, years ago it couldn't be, but now a lot of the mining is actually reclaiming the comb. Unfortunately, you can't see it. They have what they call cogeneration plants, and they'll take the comb, the leftover stuff, and they'll kind of puff it in, and they get like a vapor fire out of it. There's 2 cogeneration plants over in the Mahoney Mountain over there, or Locust Mountain, and they're heating and providing electricity for 2 state prisons over there using this coal.
Yeah.
Well, until they advanced the modern stoker,
yeah.
most would burn what they call nut or stove coal, which was real big coal. So in a lot of these comb banks like that, there's small coal. Years ago they couldn't burn it because it was too small, it would go through the grates. But as they advanced the grates and made advances in technology, a lot of that coal is usable, so people will try and salvage that. You're welcome.
I think you can see that coal gen plant way over there. The stack of it.
Yeah, the stack of it. I couldn't see it when I was over. That is the defunct Ashland State Hospital, formerly St. Catherine's. It's for sale if you want to buy it. We need a hospital here. Unfortunately, it opened in 1880 as the Ashland Hospital for injured miners. First couple of years they were open, they'd only treat men and boys injured in the mines. Then they opened to the general public. And the state ran it till about 1983, and they divested of all their hospital holdings. It went into a community board, and then it was sold to a gentleman who specialized in buying small hospitals like that. And from what I understand, one of his employees was doing a little embezzling or something, and it wound up in bankruptcy. At one time, they were converting it to a rehab center, but for some reason, with licensing, that fell through. And
I heard they're getting a lot of break-ins and vandalism.
they've had quite a few, yes, unfortunately.
You know, one of the guys that work there, that refurbishing it or
Copper,
yeah.
they go and steal the copper, the wiring, the plumbing.
And they did say they've seen ghosts of some kind.
I've heard that. They won't allow any paranormal investigators in there. That would be interesting.
That would.
Supposedly the woman who was head of the maternity ward haunts the place.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
I don't know how true that is.
Mary or something.
I'd be lying if I said.
Right.
Yeah.
I've heard that story.
All right, folks, I'm going to take you. I'm going to give you some pictures to look at going back. I'm going to preface that with an apology. At the end of last season, I put my pictures away so I'd remember where they were for this year. Unfortunately, I didn't remember where they were, so I had to resurrect some old beat-up ones. It's some Centralia pictures before and after. You get an idea of what it looks like, and some pictures from the 80s when the mine fire was actually at the surface burning on what they call an outcropping. I don't have a set for each car, so I'll give them the alternate cars. You can take a look at them, pass them back and forth, and I'll get them back out at the beginning. Thanks for coming, folks. You're a good group.
Thank you. It was
Thank
awesome. Great information. So we were given permission to come back and get a closer look of the pit here. So this just gives you an idea of what a mine pit would look like, similar to the one in Centralia where the infamous fire began. Obviously would have been a lot deeper than this, because he said this would have been 400 feet deeper than what it actually is right now. And you can see up here, that's where the mine ridge was, or the coal ridge was, right up in there. And this is what they call the comb. There's a piece right here.
Oh, they're crazy. They're like my best friends. But yeah, it's
You know, well, it looks like you see it everywhere.
so he just
All right, my turn. Bring it on, everybody. All right, so that's going to end it for the Pioneer Tunnel.
What's that?
Who's that guy?
Who's he?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Here they come.
What is this? Velvet?
Something like
Smooth.
It's like
Jeez. It's like you glow in the dark.
Yes, it does.
Make
Actually.
sure I can see this tonight.
He's definitely gonna edit this.
Compose yourself.
Subscribe, like, thanks, bye.
fell over.
Want Matt's butt? Yeah.
You gonna edit this?
We got it! I'll show you, make it look easy. Oh, there it goes! Dun, dun, dun. And there he goes.
Just zoom in. Yeah.
Okay, so I had the idea of sitting on the back of the caboose, but watch his footage because he's going to get the better footage than me because he's going to get the rear view.
Yes, you want to sit up here too?
Giggity, I said rear view.
Oh.